rock music, deck building, turn-based strategy, and a mysterious adventure. What's there not to like? Well, that depends on if there's anything to like about Spelldrifter, but if you want to know, watch on and find out. My name is Thoraxe, and this is Strategy for Busy People. If you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you what to play. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you probably know that Spelldrifter by Free Range Games has a lot stacked up against it. The barely 3 hours of playtime probably tells you what you want to know, but that won't stop me from telling you what you want to know. You know? It's a deck builder, which I haven't necessarily always been a fan of. It's also a turn-based strategy game, which I haven't necessarily always been a fan of. So why would I be a fan of the combination of the two? Well, I figured I'd give it a try. Fort Triumph was solidly in the turn-based strategy realm, and I actually did like that quite a bit. It ultimately boils down to the ramp-up and many of the rest of the game mechanics. The aesthetic of this game is actually pretty rad right out of the box. It has this metal rocker thing going on as soon as you fire it up. Power chords, heavy drums, it's not the kind of music that is normally associated with a strategy game that sits on top of a kind of fantasy backdrop. So that's refreshing. What wasn't refreshing was this weird camera glitch that I couldn't seem to figure out. The camera would just start moving and there was no way to undo it. It was as if the game thought a key was stuck, but I assure you, no keys were stuck. It became a major detraction from the game, in spite of a lot of reasonable things going for it. The tutorial was pretty good and introduced you to several of the key character classes and their game mechanics. It did feel rather slow at times. The story was just barely enough to keep it going along, and I do mean barely. I almost bounced out before getting into the meat of the game. Magic is apparently relatively new to this world, and the Starfall town in which the game takes place is a pretty rough and tumble kind of spot. Your intrepid crew of brawlers sets out to, well, I'm not exactly sure what we are setting out to do. The tutorial sets a scenario where you're all supposed to do something or other, but darn it, it's important. The primary game loop is that you navigate on a city map and then have encounters. These encounters are turn-based battles where you use your character cards to do things and the stuff. There are all manner of attacks, defenses, buffs, etc. You have seen all of these tropes before, I assure you. Your character has 2 standard cards they can always use, one of which is a guard. Depending on the point value of the card played, your character will have to wait in the turn order. That mechanic is actually unique in that you now have not only the decision of what action to play generally, but also how that action might place the character's next action or who they may be attacked or molested by in the interim. I embarked on my journey with a combination of a fighter tank kind of character, a healer type of character, and then a mage who had a lot of ranged abilities. I generally settled into a playstyle of using the tank to draw enemies in, and then buffing him via the healer and or the ranged mage, who also had some buff spells. On top of these standard tropes and behaviors, each character or class had a special set of quote-unquote points that they could gain and work with throughout the encounter. The tank warrior character could burn a bunch of rage points that would alter the damage or healing value of some cards. The mage would get some bonuses on card plays once she had built up enough focus. And the healer had faith points that behaved similarly to the mage in some ways. Figuring out a good balance of characters is important, but also figuring out a good balance of your cards is important too. You first start out with the exact number of cards you can use, 20 if you're counting, which you have to do because you have to count them. And through your encounter victories, you can earn additional cards. Your characters can also earn artifacts, which provide some permanent status benefits. As you might expect, designing your deck becomes important. And it's important not only for each character individually, but you have to start thinking about how each character's cards might play off one another. Pun intended, I suppose. For example, the Bloodthirsty artifact for my warrior would have been great because it added +1 damage to any enemy that was suffering from the bleeding status. Unfortunately, none of the characters actually had a card that would inflict bleeding status, so using that artifact was not doing me any favors. After exploring the first game chapter and map for a while, I encountered some really gnarly dudes that were frankly totally kicking my ass. I tried a few different techniques and tactics and simply got it handed to me over and over again. I could have gone back and done many of the previous encounters over, trying to level up my characters, get more cards, or both. Oh, you can also earn coins from completing encounters, which enables you to buy cards in the shop, but the camera was still stuck in the spinning mode, and I was getting kind of miffed by the whole thing, so I bounced out. Before I give my final verdict, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to share with your friends. Agree with me? Disagree with me? Or want to see other content? Let me know in the comments below. Want to try this game yourself? Check out my humble affiliate link below. And if you want to support me in making more of these videos, become a patron on Patreon. Your support really makes a difference. The final verdict. The game is simple enough on the surface, but clearly has a lot of complexity and depth that you could explore via the deck building mechanics. If you can get past some grinding at the beginning, I bet you could figure out some really solid combinations of decks and characters and really get into that whole aspect of the game. In spite of my distaste for turn-based tactical strategy, I actually didn't mind that part of Spelldrifter at all. The turns moved quickly along, planning where my characters should go or where the enemies might end up, and all of that felt nice. The pacing was good too. Unfortunately, the weird UI glitch and the inevitable grind I was facing, combined with the likely trolling of wikis and Reddit posts, just wasn't exciting for me. On my trademark 3-point score scale of avoid, meh, and I forgot to eat, there was surprisingly little food in Spelldrifter for being a fantasy game. I expected ale or grog and some bone-in meat or something. And while the shawarma I had for dinner was boneless hanger steak, Spelldrifter has a fair bit of meat on the bone if you are into deck builders and or turn-based strategy-type games. It's a solid meh for me, but your mileage may vary. Hanger steak is delicious, by the way, especially shawarma marinated and grilled.